November 24, 1943, Tarawa Atoll, Pacific Theater. The morning air trembled with the thunder of 16-inch naval guns as USS Maryland's shells crashed into the coral island below. In a reinforced bunker, Japanese Captain Hara lowered his binoculars and reached for his field notebook, its pages already stained with salt spray and sweat. Around him, the constant roar of American artillery created a symphony of destruction that had been playing for 3 days without pause. He wrote carefully, "The Americans fire shells recklessly as if their supply were infinite. We count every round." Outside, another salvo thundered overhead, 30 shells in 60 seconds from a single battleship. In the same hour, Hara's artillery section had fired exactly 4 rounds, each one precisely aimed, each one carefully calculated against their dwindling ammunition stores. Neither commander yet understood that this fundamental difference in approach would define not just this battle, but the entire Pacific War. The story of abundance versus scarcity was about to unfold. The numbers told a story that few could comprehend. In 1943, in the sprawling factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh, American assembly lines rolled out artillery pieces at a pace that defied Japanese military calculations. The Watervliet arsenal alone produced more heavy artillery in a single month than Japan's entire industrial complex could manufacture in 6 months. By November 1943, American factories had delivered 11,285 artillery pieces to Pacific forces, while Japan's total artillery production for the year barely exceeded 3,200 units. Captain Hara understood these statistics intimately, though he learned them through the bitter mathematics of shortage rather than abundance. His Type 96 150 minnow howitzer represented months of careful manufacturing in Japan's stretched industrial system. Each shell fired from its barrel consumed resources that could not be easily replaced. The weapon itself was a masterpiece of engineering efficiency, accurate, reliable, and designed to maximize every precious round of ammunition. In contrast, American gunners operated under fundamentally different assumptions. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison of the 14th Marine Artillery Regiment later recorded in his memoir, "We were told to fire for effect, maintain pressure, keep the enemy's heads down. Conservation wasn't part of our vocabulary." Morrison's battalion alone expended more artillery, shells in the first day at Tarawa, than many Japanese units would fire in the entire war. The philosophical divide ran deeper than mere numbers. American military doctrine embraced overwhelming firepower as both tactic and strategy. Japanese doctrine, born from necessity, elevated precision and conservation to art forms. Where American artillery manuals spoke of sustained bombardment and fire superiority, Japanese manuals emphasized maximum effectiveness per round and resource preservation. This contrast became visible in the smallest details. American artillery units received ammunition deliveries measured in tons. Japanese units received ammunition counted by individual shells, with each delivery logged, verified, and distributed according to strict priority protocols. An American artillery sergeant might fire 100 rounds to suppress a suspected enemy position. His Japanese counterpart would fire one carefully aimed round, then wait to assess its effectiveness before considering a second shot. The USS Maryland carried 1/800 16-inch shells when she arrived at Tarawa. Each shell weighed 2,700 pounds and cost more to manufacture than many Japanese soldiers earned in a year. Yet American naval doctrine called for sustained bombardment until enemy resistance ceased, regardless of ammunition expenditure. The battleship's gun crews fired 387 of these massive shells in the first 2 days of the Tarawa operation, a display of firepower that represented more explosive force than Japan's entire naval artillery could deliver in a month. Aboard the Maryland, gunner's mate First Class Robert Chen recorded the systematic nature of American abundance. "We had shells stacked everywhere," he wrote to his wife. "The magazines were full. The handling rooms were full. We had shells on deck covered by tarps. The boatswain said we brought enough ammunition to level a small city, and we probably did." The M114 1/5mm howitzer, America's workhorse artillery piece, embodied this philosophy of abundance. Manufactured at the rate of 47 units per day across multiple factories, these weapons arrived in the Pacific with ammunition supplies measured not in rounds, but in railroad cars. A single M114 battery received more shells in its initial equipment load than an entire Japanese artillery regiment would fire during their longest defensive campaign. Master Sergeant William Hayes of the 3rd Marine Artillery noted the psychological impact of unlimited ammunition. You could fire all day and know that more shells were already on ships heading your way. It changed how you thought about the war. We weren't trying to make every shot count. We were trying to make every shot unnecessary for the infantry. This abundance created its own tactical doctrine. American artillery officers learned to use firepower as a substitute for reconnaissance, firing extensively into areas where enemy forces might be located, rather than conducting time-consuming observation missions. The practice, known as reconnaissance by fire, would have been unthinkable to resource-constrained Japanese forces. The statistical reality was staggering. American forces in the Pacific expended an average of 6,000 artillery shells per day during active operations. Japanese forces averaged 200 shells per day during their most intensive defensive actions. In a concrete bunker on Tarawa's southeastern shore, Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto maintained what would become one of the war's most meticulous artillery records. His leather-bound logbook contained entries for every shell fired by his Type 96 howitzer crew, noting time, target, observed effect, and justification for expenditure. Entry 127 read 0630 hours 24 November. 1 high explosive shell, landing craft concentration. Direct hit observed, 1 craft destroyed. Expenditure justified. Yamamoto's careful record-keeping reflected the reality of Japanese artillery operations throughout the Pacific. Each artillery piece received a specific ammunition allocation, and battery commanders faced court-martial if they exceeded their allowance without explicit authorization from regimental headquarters. The Japanese artillery manual stated clearly, 1 well-aimed shell that destroys its target is infinitely more valuable than 10 shells that create only noise and smoke. This conservation philosophy created remarkable innovations in Japanese artillery tactics. Forward observers developed sophisticated mathematical calculations to ensure first-round accuracy, eliminating the need for ranging shots that American forces used routinely. Japanese gunners practiced their craft until they could achieve target accuracy rates of 78% with their first shot, a figure that American artillery units, despite superior equipment, rarely exceeded even after multiple ranging rounds. The Type 96 howitzer itself reflected Japanese design philosophy: rugged, accurate, and capable of sustained operation with minimal maintenance. Unlike American artillery pieces that relied on frequent barrel replacement and extensive logistical support, Japanese guns were designed to function effectively even when spare parts and maintenance supplies became unavailable. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, commanding a 4-gun battery on Tarawa, implemented a rotation system that maximized the effectiveness of his limited ammunition. His guns fired in carefully coordinated sequences, with each piece targeting different sectors to create the impression of larger artillery strength. The Americans count their shells by the thousand, Tanaka noted in his final report. We make each shell count as if it were our last, because it very well might be. The psychological burden of conservation weighed heavily on Japanese artillery crews. Every missed shot represented not just tactical failure, but criminal waste of irreplaceable resources. This pressure created artillery crews of remarkable precision, but also contributed to the stress and exhaustion that eventually degraded Japanese defensive effectiveness. November 20th, 1943, 06:01 hours. The USS Maryland's first salvo of the day thundered across Tarawa Lagoon, 16-inch shells screaming toward Japanese positions at 2,500 feet per second. On the bridge, Captain Joel Doyle watched through binoculars as the shells impacted across the island's defensive positions. "Continuous fire," he ordered. Keep it up until we see white flags, or nothing moving. The naval bombardment of Tarawa represented American firepower doctrine at its most concentrated. Over 3 days, American naval forces expended 3,000 tons of artillery shells on an island measuring less than 3 square miles. The Maryland alone fired 387 16-inch shells, each one capable of destroying a city block. Supporting cruisers and destroyers added another 2,000 shells of various calibers, creating what marine observers described as the most intensive bombardment in naval history. Captain Hara, observing from his bunker, recorded the systematic nature of American fire. Row 630. Large caliber shells landing every 30 seconds in Sector 3. Row 645. Bombardment shifts to Sector 5, same intensity. Row 100 to return to Sector 3. The pattern suggests unlimited ammunition supply. His observations proved accurate. American fire control officers operated under orders to maintain continuous bombardment regardless of ammunition expenditure. The contrast in artillery philosophy became starkly visible during the bombardment. While American ships fired at the rate of 1 shell every 15 seconds, Japanese artillery remained silent for hours at a time, waiting for targets that justified ammunition expenditure. When Captain Hara's batteries finally responded, they fired single, precisely aimed shells at American landing craft, achieving a documented hit rate of 43%, remarkable accuracy for artillery firing at moving targets. Gunnery Sergeant Mike O'Brien of the USS Maryland later recalled the abundance that defined American operations. "We had so many shells that we were firing at individual palm trees just to keep the guns active. The idea was to pulverize everything on that island, whether we could see targets or not." The bombardment statistics revealed the fundamental disparity. American forces fired more artillery shells at Tarawa in 3 days than Japanese forces would fire in the next 6 months of Pacific fighting combined. Yet, despite this overwhelming firepower advantage, Japanese defensive positions remained largely intact when the Marines finally landed. Inside Bunker Complex 7A, Corporal Kenji Matsuda adjusted his range card for the 4th time that morning. The hand-drawn document contained precise firing data for every potential target across Tarawa's lagoon approach, each landing zone marked with exact range, bearing and deflection settings for his Type 96 howitzer. Unlike American artillery crews who relied on multiple ranging shots to find their targets, Matsuda's calculations had to be perfect on the first shot. The Japanese range card represented months of careful preparation and observation. Artillery crews spent weeks creating detailed maps of their firing zones, measuring distances to prominent landmarks, calculating wind drift effects, and plotting precise coordinates for every potential target. Each gun position contained these meticulously prepared firing data cards, allowing Japanese gunners to engage targets immediately without the luxury of ranging shots. When the first wave of American landing craft appeared at 0900 hours, Matsuda's gun crew demonstrated the effectiveness of their careful preparation. His first shot struck landing craft LCVP-127 directly amidships, killing 12 Marines and sinking the vessel in 47 seconds. His second shot, fired 3 minutes later, disabled landing craft LCP-203, 2 shells, 2 hits, a precision rate that American artillery units, despite their superior equipment and unlimited ammunition, rarely achieved. First Lieutenant Robert Anderson, commanding the landing craft wave, witnessed the effectiveness of Japanese artillery conservation. They weren't firing constantly like our guys. They'd wait, perfectly quiet, until we got into their range. Then, wham, a shell would land right on top of one of our boats. It was like they had been practicing on that exact spot for months. The mathematical precision required for Japanese artillery operations created crews of remarkable skill. Sergeant Yamamoto's gun crew could calculate firing solutions in less than 60 seconds, adjust for wind and temperature variations, and deliver accurate fire without preliminary ranging. Their training emphasized mental mathematics, map reading, and mechanical precision, skills that American crews, relying on abundant ammunition for bracketing shots, rarely developed to the same degree. By noon on November 20th, Japanese artillery had achieved a documented effectiveness rate of 31% hits per rounds fired, a ratio that would have been considered impossible under American artillery doctrine, which assumed that accuracy came through volume of fire rather than precision of individual shots. Colonel Frank Morrison's ammunition expenditure report for November 1943 contained numbers that defied Japanese military comprehension. The 14th Marine Artillery Regiment expended 127,000 rounds of various calibers during the month, an average of 4,200 shells per day. Morrison's personal notation on the report summary read, "Ammunition supply excellent. No restrictions on fire missions. Recommend continued maximum suppression doctrine." The official U.S. Artillery Manual for Pacific Operations stated the doctrine clearly. Superiority of fire is achieved through volume and sustained delivery rather than individual shot precision. Ammunition conservation is secondary to maintaining constant pressure on enemy positions. This philosophy represented a fundamental departure from traditional artillery thinking, enabled entirely by American industrial capacity. Master Sergeant William Chen, ammunition supply coordinator for the 3rd Marine Division, managed logistics that would have sustained an entire Japanese Army group. His daily inventory sheets listed 15,000 rounds of 105mm ammunition, 8,000 rounds of 155mm ammunition, and 3,000 rounds of 75mm ammunition, quantities that exceeded the total artillery. Ammunition available to Japanese forces on all Pacific Islands combined. The U.S. and American approach to artillery created what military historians would later term fire superiority through abundance, instead of carefully selecting targets and calculating precise firing solutions. American artillery doctrine emphasized continuous bombardment of suspected enemy areas. Fire missions lasted for hours rather than minutes, with guns firing at maximum rate until ammunition trucks required refilling. Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 14th Marines, recorded the psychological impact of unlimited ammunition. Our men fired with confidence because they knew more shells were always available. Japanese prisoners told us their artillery crews were terrified of wasting ammunition because replacements might never arrive. The statistical comparison revealed the scope of American abundance. The average American artillery battery expended more ammunition in 1 week than an comparable Japanese battery would fire during 6 months of combat operations. An American 155mm howitzer crew considered 100 rounds per day a light fire mission, while their Japanese counterparts viewed 10 rounds per day as intensive bombardment. This abundance created its own tactical problems. American ammunition dumps required extensive security, complex logistics, and constant resupply operations that diverted resources from combat missions. Yet the psychological and tactical advantages of unlimited firepower far outweighed these logistical burdens. By November 22nd, the mathematics of attrition had begun to favor American abundance over Japanese precision. Captain Hara's artillery battery, which had begun the battle with 240 rounds of ammunition, possessed only 31 rounds remaining. His casualty report, filed with regimental headquarters, listed 2 guns destroyed by counter-battery fire, 1 gun abandoned due to ammunition exhaustion, and 1 gun crew reduced to 3 men from equipment failures. They lacked spare parts to repair. The Japanese artillery experience on Tarawa revealed the ultimate limitation of conservation doctrine, precision, and efficiency could not overcome the simple mathematics of sustained combat. Hara's remaining gun crew had achieved a remarkable 47% hit rate against American targets, but their total rounds fired, 209. Shells over 3 days represented less ammunition than a single American battery expended in 4 hours. Sergeant Yamamoto's meticulous logbook entries grew shorter and more desperate as the battle progressed. His final entry read 23rd November, 1400 hours, 7 rounds remaining. Gun crew reduced to 2 men. Request permission to use remaining ammunition for final defensive fire. The permission never came. Communications with regimental headquarters had been severed by American bombardment. The American artillery experience stood in stark contrast. Colonel Morrison's after-action report noted ammunition resupply exceeded consumption throughout the operation. No fire missions were refused due to ammunition shortage. Recommend increasing basic load for future operations to enable even more intensive suppression fires. Corporal Robert Hayes, serving with an American 150mm howitzer crew, described the abundance that defined American artillery operations. We fired so many shells that the gun barrels got too hot to touch. When we ran low, trucks showed up within an hour with more ammunition than we could shoot in a week. Meanwhile, the Japanese artillery got quieter and quieter until we barely heard from them at all. The final statistics told the story completely. American forces expended 3,000 tons of artillery ammunition during the Tarawa operation. Japanese forces fired approximately 1,100 individual shells, a ratio of nearly 300 to 1 in terms of explosive weight delivered. Despite their remarkable accuracy and tactical skill, Japanese artillery crews simply could not sustain operations against an enemy with effectively unlimited ammunition, the Type 96. Howitzer in position 7-day fell silent at 13:47 hours on November 23, 1943, American. Marine patrols found the gun intact but abandoned. Its ammunition storage completely empty except for 3 star shells, illumination rounds useless for defensive fire. Beside the gun lay Sergeant Yamamoto's logbook, its final entry reading, "All high-explosive ammunition expended." Gun crew withdrawing to infantry positions, weapon operational but cannot engage targets. The abandoned howitzer represented the culmination of Japanese artillery philosophy during the Pacific War. Despite achieving remarkable accuracy, rates, and tactical effectiveness, conservation doctrine ultimately failed against the simple mathematics of American abundance. The gun crew had fired 237 shells with documented accuracy of 44%, a precision rate that American artillery units rarely achieved despite unlimited ammunition. Yet precision without sustainability proved insufficient against an enemy that could afford to be wasteful. Marine Lieutenant Robert Anderson, leading the patrol that discovered the position, noted the meticulous organization around the abandoned gun. Everything was perfectly arranged, shell casings stacked neatly, range cards posted clearly, the gun itself clean and operational. They had just run out of things to shoot. Anderson's observation captured the essential tragedy of Japanese artillery operations. Tactical excellence undermined by strategic impossibility. The contrast with American artillery positions was striking. When American guns ceased firing, it was typically due to mechanical breakdown, crew exhaustion, or mission completion, never ammunition shortage. Master Sergeant William Chen noted in his supply report, "Several batteries requested permission to cease fire due to barrel overheating rather than ammunition shortage. Ammunition expenditure exceeded all planning estimates without limiting tactical effectiveness." Captain Hara's final artillery report, filed 3 days after the battle ended, contained a stark assessment. Artillery conservation doctrine proved tactically sound but strategically insufficient. Enemy ammunition supply appeared unlimited. Recommend fundamental revision of artillery. Employment doctrine for future operations. The report never reached higher. Headquarters, Japanese communications, had been destroyed by the same overwhelming firepower that silenced their guns. The abandoned Type 96 howitzer became a symbol of the Pacific War's artillery disparity. American abundance had not defeated Japanese skill. It had simply outlasted Japanese resources, demonstrating that in prolonged combat, sustainability mattered more than precision. The numbers emerging from American war production facilities in late 1943 revealed an industrial capacity that Japanese military planners had failed to comprehend. The War Production Board's classified monthly report showed artillery production rates that exceeded Japan's total industrial output across all military categories. American factories produced 2,147 artillery pieces in November 1943 alone, more than Japan had manufactured since the war began. The water fleet. Arsenal's production statistics demonstrated the scope of American industrial mobilization, operating 24 hours per day with 3 full shifts. The facility produced 155 mm howitzer every 4.7 hours. The arsenal's monthly output of 157 heavy artillery pieces exceeded the total artillery strength of many Japanese Army divisions. Production supervisor James Mackenzie noted, "We're building guns faster than the military can figure out where to deploy them." Japanese intelligence estimates, captured after the war, revealed the fundamental miscalculation that shaped their military planning. Japanese analysts had projected maximum American artillery production at 800 pieces per month, a figure that American industry exceeded by 350% during peak production periods. Colonel Hideki Yamashita's intelligence summary stated, "American production capacity appears to exceed our most optimistic estimates by a factor of 4. Recommend immediate revision of strategic assumptions." The ammunition production disparity was even more dramatic. American factories produced 1.2 million artillery shells per day during 1943, while Japanese factories averaged 3,200 shells per day. The Badger Army ammunition plant in Wisconsin alone outproduced Japan's entire ammunition industry by a ratio of 40-1. Plant supervisor Mary Rodriguez recorded, "We're making more shells in one shift than some countries make in a year." This industrial advantage translated directly into tactical superiority on Pacific battlefields. American artillery units operated without ammunition constraints, enabling fire missions that Japanese commanders considered impossible. The 14th Marine Artillery, regiment's expenditure of 127,000 rounds in November 1943, represented more ammunition than Japanese forces would fire. During the remainder of the Pacific War, the psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Prisoners of war consistently reported demoralization caused by the relentless American bombardments that continued day and night without apparent limitation. One captured artillery officer stated, "We knew we could not win when their guns never stopped firing, but ours fell silent from lack of shells." The U.S. Army Artillery School at Fort Sill revised its training doctrine in December 1943, incorporating lessons learned from Pacific operations where American abundance had proven superior to Japanese precision. The updated manual stated, "Sustained fire superiority, achieved through volume and reliability of ammunition supply, provides decisive tactical advantage over precision. Fire with limited ammunition." The doctrinal change reflected a fundamental shift in artillery thinking, enabled entirely by American industrial capacity. Colonel Frank Morrison, recently returned from Tarawa, lectured artillery officers on the practical implications of unlimited ammunition. "Gentlemen, we have learned that continuous suppression is more effective than precise targeting when ammunition supply is unlimited. The enemy cannot respond effectively when under constant bombardment, regardless of their accuracy when they do fire." Morrison's doctrine would become standard practice for American artillery operations throughout the Pacific War. The training revisions emphasized rapid-fire techniques and sustained bombardment procedures that would have been impossible under Japanese resource constraints. American artillery crews learned to fire continuous missions lasting 12 hours or more, with ammunition resupply trucks standing by to maintain uninterrupted fire. Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart noted, "We're teaching our crews to think in terms of ammunition expenditure rates rather than individual shot placement." Japanese artillery doctrine, by contrast, remained focused on conservation and precision throughout the war. The Japanese artillery manual, updated after Tarawa, continued to emphasize maximum effectiveness per round remains the primary artillery objective. Ammunition conservation is essential for sustained defensive operations. The manual's authors apparently failed to recognize that conservation doctrine could not succeed against enemies with unlimited resources. The statistical evidence supported American doctrinal changes. Artillery units employing sustained bombardment tactics achieved faster mission completion times and reduced infantry casualties compared to units using traditional precision fire methods. The 3rd Marine Division's artillery achieved a 67% reduction in time required to neutralize enemy positions when using continuous fire techniques rather than aimed fire. Procedures training programs at Fort Sill began, incorporating abundance management courses, teaching artillery officers how to coordinate massive ammunition expenditures without creating logistical bottlenecks. These courses, unimaginable under Japanese resource constraints, reflected the fundamental advantage that American industry provided to artillery operations in the Pacific Theater. The last Japanese artillery piece on Tarawa fired its final round at 06:23 hours on November 24, 1943. A Type 96 howitzer in position 12C had sustained defensive fire for 4 days with remarkable accuracy. But Sergeant Koji Nakamura's crew finally exhausted their ammunition supply. The gun fell silent not from enemy action or mechanical failure, but from the simple mathematics of attrition. They had counted every round until none remained. American Marine patrols advancing across the island encountered 17 abandoned Japanese artillery positions, each containing operational guns with empty ammunition storage areas. The systematic nature of Japanese ammunition exhaustion impressed even American officers accustomed to unlimited firepower. Captain Robert Hayes noted, "Every Japanese gun position we found was perfectly organized and maintained. They hadn't been destroyed, they had just run out of things to shoot." The contrast with American artillery positions revealed the fundamental difference between the two military systems. American guns continued firing throughout the battle and beyond, with ammunition trucks maintaining steady resupply operations. Master Sergeant William Chen's logistics report showed American artillery units firing an average of 2,400 rounds per day during the final 2 days of the battle, when Japanese artillery had been completely silenced by ammunition exhaustion. The psychological impact of Japanese artillery silence was documented by Marine riflemen who had endured 4 days of precise, deadly fire from Japanese positions. Private First Class Mike O'Brien recorded, "When their guns finally stopped, we knew we had won. Not because we had destroyed them, but because they couldn't shoot back anymore. It was like fighting someone who ran out of bullets." Japanese artillery officers captured after the battle provided insights into the conservation doctrine that had failed against American abundance. Major Takeshi Tanaka stated during interrogation, "We achieved remarkable accuracy with our limited ammunition. Our hit rates exceeded American rates by significant margins. But accuracy without sustainability is ultimately worthless in prolonged combat." The statistics validated Tanaka's assessment. Japanese artillery on Tarawa achieved a documented hit rate of 41% across all engagements compared to American hit rates of 23%. However, Japanese forces fired approximately 100 rounds during the entire battle, while American forces fired more than 30,000 rounds, a disparity that made Japanese precision ultimately irrelevant. The final statistical analysis of Pacific War artillery operations revealed numbers that vindicated American abundance doctrine while highlighting the impossibility of Japanese conservation strategy. The official U.S. Army report, classified until 1963, showed that American forces expended 12.3 million tons of artillery ammunition during Pacific operations, compared to Japanese expenditure of 127,000 tons, a ratio of nearly 100 to 1 in terms of total explosive weight delivered. The mathematical precision of this disparity demonstrated the decisive role of industrial capacity in modern warfare. American artillery units averaged 47 rounds fired per enemy casualty inflicted, while Japanese artillery averaged 3.2 rounds per casualty, a remarkable efficiency rate that proved insufficient against unlimited American resources. Colonel James Morrison's post-war analysis concluded Japanese artillery achieved superior accuracy per round, but could not sustain operations against forces with effectively unlimited ammunition supply. The human cost of this disparity became clear in casualty statistics from major Pacific battles. Japanese artillery crew casualties reached 89% during prolonged engagements, not primarily from enemy fire, but from the psychological and physical exhaustion of operating under extreme resource constraints. American artillery casualties averaged 12% during comparable operations, with most losses attributed to enemy action rather than operational stress. Captain Hara's perspective, recorded in post-war interviews, reflected the Japanese understanding of their tactical situation. "We knew from the beginning that we could not match American ammunition expenditure. Our strategy was to make every shell count, hoping that superior accuracy would compensate for inferior numbers. The mathematics proved against us." The industrial comparison supported Hara's assessment. Peak American artillery ammunition production reached 50,000 tons per month by 1944, while Japanese production never exceeded 1,200 tons per month. A single American ammunition plant often outproduced Japan's entire artillery ammunition industry by factors of 10 or more. The strategic implications extended beyond individual battles. American abundance enabled sustained offensive operations that Japanese forces could not counter effectively. While American artillery could maintain continuous bombardment for weeks, Japanese artillery typically exhausted its ammunition supply within days of intensive combat, leaving defensive positions vulnerable to follow-up assaults. In the Japanese War Museum in Tokyo, a restored Type 96 howitzer stands as testament to the artillery crews who fought with remarkable skill despite impossible resource constraints. The gun's bronze plaque reads, "In memory of artillery crews who made every shell count when counting was all they could do." Beside the howitzer, Sergeant Yamamoto's logbook lies open to his final entry, preserving the meticulous record-keeping that characterized Japanese artillery operations throughout the Pacific War. The preserved howitzer represents more than military hardware. It symbolizes the fundamental tension between tactical excellence and strategic impossibility that defined Japanese military operations. Despite achieving accuracy rates that exceeded American artillery performance by significant margins, Japanese conservation doctrine ultimately failed against the mathematics of unlimited American resources. Colonel Frank Morrison, reflecting in his 1963 memoir, acknowledged the effectiveness of Japanese artillery tactics while recognizing the decisive role of American abundance. The Japanese artillery crews we faced were among the most skilled gunners in military history. Their accuracy and efficiency were remarkable. But skill without sustainability is insufficient in modern warfare, where industrial capacity determines ultimate victory. The statistical legacy of Pacific artillery operations influenced post-war military doctrine worldwide. The American model of sustained bombardment, supported by unlimited ammunition supply, became standard practice for industrialized militaries, while the Japanese emphasis on precision and conservation was relegated to special operations and guerrilla warfare applications. Captain Hara's final assessment, recorded in 1958, provided the most poignant perspective on the artillery war. "We fought with honor and achieved remarkable tactical success with limited resources. But wars are won by nations that can afford to be wasteful, not by those forced to be careful. America's greatest weapon was not their artillery, it was their ability to replace every shell they fired." The Type 96 howitzer in the museum remains silent now, its breech open and empty, its ammunition racks bare. Yet it speaks eloquently of the courage and skill of crews who faced impossible odds with remarkable dignity. In the end, they had counted every round until none remained, while their enemies fired with the confidence of unlimited supply. The mathematics of war had rendered their precision irrelevant, but history preserves their dedication to duty under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. What is your perspective on this part of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every memory and reflection helps keep the past alive.